All right. Well, welcome to the first episode of Converse Cousins with Mike and Mark.
Converse Cousins. It sounds like we're DeMarcus Cousins' younger brother.
That's okay. You grew up with Marcus Cousins as a Sacramento Kings fan, and now my Golden State Warriors are lucky enough to have a fifth All-Star.
We'll see if they're lucky.
We'll see if they're lucky, yeah. I am your co-host, Mike Saltzman, and with me, as always, is my cousin, Mark Otten.
That's me.
And we'll be discussing new topics every time. Right now, we're going to start a series called How to Fix Your Favorite Sport. With the Super Bowl coming in a couple days, we figured we'd start with the NFL. So we're going to come up with some rule changes that if you listen to this podcast, you will realize every one of these will be immediately adopted.
Absolutely correct. All of them.
Within a week of us announcing them. So look for these announcements the week after the Super Bowl.
Although we may not always agree. So if we disagree, then there may have to be further discussion.
Yeah, and just the ones that I came up with
are... That's not fair, but okay, fair enough.
So this was your inspiration, this was your idea for a topic and a series to do. So why don't you take the first rule change that you'd like to see?
True, although my cousin over here has more podcast experience than I do. Okay, so let's go with... the first that I thought of, which was talking about solutions for concussion issues in football. This could go at all through all levels of football, from the NFL down to the 6-year-olds that are trying to pick up football for the first time. But clearly, the NFL has been hard at work at trying to come up with solutions and viable options for.
I don't know about they're hard at work, but they're finally doing something.
They're doing something, and a lot of people have been thinking about it. And there's been this CTE thing where retired players keep coming down with different maladies, and it seems quite serious. And so it's definitely a concern. We're just fans. Mike over here is a former player. I'm not, but there's plenty to talk about here. So you want to give a couple of your thoughts? And then
my initial thought is an extreme one, but I think we get rid of helmets altogether. I think that you look at a sport like rugby versus the NFL. There's many more concussions in the NFL than there are in rugby, and that rugby is not that dissimilar to football. The rules are different in some ways, but it's a very similar sport. It's very physical.
It's very popular too, right? In Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. In some countries, it's one of the most popular sports, and it would be hard, I think, for fans who grew up on the game to see such an extreme change. But I also think that for the safety of all the kids coming up, it's something that should happen. And I do think that when you look at the youth football, that's where the change needs to happen immediately. Whereas with
now, are you going to get kids, and I mean, presumably we implement this all the way up. Mm-hmm. Are you going to get kids that are 12 years old, and you're like, all right, we're going to go without helmets this year? They're just going to drop out. What do you think?
I think some might. I think the idea of using your helmet or using your shoulder pads, to inflict pain, is something that guys were kind of instilled in them going up. I mean, when I played, you put your face mask through a guy's chest. You put your helmet right into someone. Well, that's going to lead to several concussions. And back in my day, which was the late '90s, I was never diagnosed with a concussion in 4 years of high school and 3 years of college. And the idea that I never got one is ludicrous. So, we're just now finally putting some genuine thought into the seriousness of this.
But I feel like if it's 12-year-olds or 10-year-olds, whatever it is,
right,
then they have helmets, let's say the first year or whatever, before they see our podcast. Then they see our podcast. They're like, oh, good idea. And so then they switch. The parents are going to be like, wait a minute, we're going backwards now. We're actually providing less protection for the kids. So then the parents are like, they don't understand. Maybe they pull their kids out,
right?
Or they perceive that football is going in the wrong direction because there's less, padding and
well, and I think that ultimately is one of the most severe myths of what safety is and isn't, is that because of helmets you're somehow safer. When in reality, when you have helmets on, you're way more likely to use your head to inflict pain. Whereas if you had no helmets, had smaller pads, or even no pads, and you were just running with the football, the idea that someone would lead with their head to make contact is, it's just not going to happen anywhere near the comparison of someone with helmets.
And I'm sure people have studied this before, like coaches and whatnot. If they haven't, maybe they, the coaches will agree. It seems like something that makes a lot of sense to me. So maybe when the parents get concerned in this scenario, we have some research study or some
absolutely. And if you just look at the results of the physical health of rugby players around the world and the physical health of football players around the world, I think it's pretty clear that NFL players have much more severe issues, not just CTE, but just concussions in general, and also just physically, just the toll that getting hit with a helmet and shoulder pads all the time for 10, 15, 20 years can do to your body.
Yeah.
What are some thoughts you have about concussions and some possible solutions?
Well, do we know what Australian football does? Because there's a big Australian football culture there.
As far as playing football or rugby?
Well, I know rugby is big, but then there's also Australian rules football. I'm trying to imagine those guys kicking that ball. Are they wearing helmets? It's not the same as.
I don't think so. No, but I don't want to speak on
maybe those
something I don't
thinner
know.
Helmets that Bronco Nagurski used to wear in 1962.
Well, and I will say if they had to do that, leather helmets that had some padding would make more sense than the helmets that we have.
Something soft.
But the main thing is to discourage people from using their head in the first place. And that then it comes down to, really funding those youth programs to have coaches that understand how to teach it. Because, one thing for me, just the little I've seen of youth football, because I didn't start playing football myself until my freshman year of high school, but to see youth football, there's a lot to be desired for what coaches are teaching, and then how it's being implemented and how it's being, translated on the field. Because most kids, and it's the nature of the age, kids that are 6, 7, 8 years old aren't going to necessarily be able to grasp the proper technique for hitting somebody and the proper technique for tackling somebody. It's just not going to be at that level that you need for safety. And so, to me right now, as long as there are kids with helmets, I would recommend parents take their kids out of youth football. Because to me, being athletic and playing sports in general, you're going to be just as ready for high school football, whether you play tackle football in middle school or elementary school or not, just by being physically stronger and bigger once you put pads on. And from what I've seen is that a freshman who's never played football and a freshman who's played 4 or 5 years of Pee Wee football, that there's not that much of a difference if the first kid is a much more physically strong kid, that the time it takes to adapt and learn the game, that by their sophomore year, that first kid's going to be better anyway. And that second kid is going to get caught up to by kids that are bigger, faster, and stronger anyway. So, the knowledge you can gain from Pee Wee football, there is some importance there, but not to the extreme of the health that they're going to inflict on themselves, or the risk that they're going to inflict on themselves to their health.
Well, for me,
what are some thoughts you have about some possible solutions?
So I go off of what my on the extreme end, I go off of what my wife has taught me over the last several years, and that is that watching people tackle each other is not fun. And so she's not interested in people making contact and falling down, and it looks violent, and sometimes it is. So I would just say, let's go all flag football. But then like 95% of people would just drop out of the sport probably.
Yeah. Well, I think something like flag football makes a lot more sense at the youth level, that you can still learn a lot about the strategy of the game, and how to. You can still, there's a lot of great teamwork still involved. The huge difference is that you don't have the physical element that you do in tackle football, but at the same time, like I was saying before, you really don't want that physical contact at that age. Your brain's still developing, your body's still developing, and you don't need to have broken bones when you're 11, 12, 13 years old.
Some might argue you should never want broken bones. I don't know,
Well, and at least when you're in high school, and then especially when you're in college, you are more physically capable of handling that. And again, with all the concussions and all the truths now about CTE and what can happen later in life, I don't blame someone that wants to back out of football altogether. I played it in high school and college. I coached it for 10 years. And it's a sport that I truly, dearly loved. And I'm willing to never be a part of it again for those reasons.
So then we go flag. And then with flag football, you have like all of the other elements. I mean, because there are elements of football that are really cool, like the strategy, mapping out the plays. It's really intricate.
Right.
For the casual fan, you don't know how much goes into mapping out the playbook and the defense and the offense and all the preparation that goes in. It's really a complicated, like intellectual kind of game.
It can be, yeah, absolutely.
That is then kind of has this image of being just these brutish guys just crashing into each other for the casual fan. So I think preserving that at the same time that we're kind of backing up a little bit in terms of like parents encouraging their kids to play to the tackle version of the sport. I think that's why we're having this conversation, is because we want to preserve those things. But the other part of it is like, if you're a kid and you're growing up and you're watching the Super Bowl, whatever it is, and you're watching these guys make big hits, you're like, wow, that's really cool. You know, there's a coolness part of the physical contact that you would lose half your participants if you subtracted that.
Well, and if you go on YouTube and you search violent NFL hits or whatever, you're going to watch some compilation videos that someone who's never heard of football would watch and be like, oh my God, what are these guys doing? This is violent. I can't watch this. And people who grew up on the game are going to be like, oh my God, I love that hit. And I can't wait. Oh my God, look at that hit was even more. So there is that that difference, but
dichotomy.
I do think that ultimately what we're both kind of saying, I think, is the more extreme is the kids. Is the youth football, there needs to be some drastic changes, even some as extreme as maybe eliminating tackle football altogether. That once somebody is 20, 21, 22 years old and they decide to make it a profession, then there's a school of thought that it's like, hey, they're choosing to do this. Now that CTE and other facts are out there, some guys have retired early because of it. Other guys have said, you know what, I know the risks and I'm still going to pursue it.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of those guys are doing it because they don't think there's anything else they can do for money, or they're scared or afraid of what their life would be if they don't have football. And so they're not necessarily making it because they believe that CTE is a myth or that they think that they're still safe, but they're willing to risk their body and mind for their family. Right. Which is a scary thing, but that's kind of it's another conversation, but it's also, at least they're making it as a 22-year-old versus making it as a 7-year-old when their parents are shoving them into the sport. Or even if they love the sport, they have no knowledge at 7 of what the long-term effects could be if they stick with that sport for a long time.
I just think that if they're making that sacrifice because they love the game, that's kind of okay because it's their choice. Right. They're an adult. They can make that choice. But if they're risking it because they think that that's the path to making money, and they're trying to get a contract, and they're doing that stuff, which a lot of athletes deal with, in professional football, the careers are very short, right, for coaches and players. So if they're doing it for that reason, then it's not as okay, it seems like.
Right.
And then I feel like we almost have a responsibility to offer them some other safer method of getting to that point. But then again, where does the money come from? Money comes from the fans coming and watching on TV and in the parks. So if you don't have tackle football, the fans probably aren't coming.
We're going to do a lot of different sports in this series, and I would say that every one of those sports, at some point, one of the conversations is going to be, well, there's too much money involved for this to change. And that's kind of an overriding theme of anything. Like if a company is being hit with a lawsuit about something, if it's worth more money to them to just ignore it, then they might ignore it because it's not worth even if they were to get a lawsuit and have to pay a fine, whatever, they're making too much money to care. And from that standpoint, the NFL, based on their fans and how much money they bring in anyway, even after all of this is out there, there's less incentive for them to be like, oh, you know what, this is a health crisis. We should just stop playing. We should stop playing football. Yeah. Right.
Don't stop. Just go to flag.
But I do think that whether it's
two-hand touch,
whether it's getting rid of helmets or doing something else extreme like flag football or whatever, that some of those things do need to be happening at the lower levels, that especially before high school, and especially with the kids that are in elementary school, that, to start them on a path of what will ultimately be a violent sport, that there's a responsibility there, I think, to protect kids from those kinds of things. And it's anything, if kids are boxing at 6 years old, if kids are doing MMA at 6 years old, you're setting them up for a lot of physical and then ultimately mental failures with what we now know about CTE and those things. Yeah. And it's not like you can't get that if you were to get hit in the head with a baseball, playing baseball as a young kid, or, you were to fall on your head going up for a rebound in basketball, right. Or, the concussions a lot of soccer players get from literally headers, for playing. So it's just every sport has that violent chance, but the chance is literally encouraged every play in football, whereas it's an outlier in most other sports.
You can get hurt, fall on your head walking down the street, but it's it's not like tackle football.
Right.
Okay, should we go to the next thing?
Yeah, let's go to the next thing. So the next one I had, and it's kind of feeds off of this one as far as maybe another way of kind of helping with the health of the game, literally more than figuratively, is so I've thought for a few years now that with the NFL 16 weeks long, but 17 weeks long because of a bye week, and 4 preseason games, where by the 4th preseason game, most teams kind of already know their team. That last preseason game is kind of a joke at this point. Most fans don't go to the games. That if you eliminate the 4th preseason game and then add a second bye week, that you would help with overall player health, and it would make it a little bit easier on the fans that instead of wasting their time with the 4th preseason game, actually have a chance for a better product on the field because the players are getting more of a chance to rest. And specifically have that second bye week be the Sunday before their Thursday night game. That with the current structure of the TV schedule, now that every single team in the NFL is playing on Thursday night, that if they don't have to play the Sunday before, and you give those 2 teams a bye week, or at least give them, that's when their second bye week is, that it would allow for no team to ever have to play 2 games in 4 days. And then on top of that, then it would be more likely that more players would be healthy for every game that season.
I just have a couple questions about this. First of all,
let's go.
What is the point of preseason in general? Like, why? Like the first 3 games, are they useful? What do players and coaches say about that?
Well, I think what they're really useful for is actually just showcasing the players you don't intend to keep with other teams hoping to trade some of them.
Okay.
Because I get the impression, for the most part, that on most levels, including the NFL, in practice what players you're going to keep.
So then the starting 22 guys, the 22 guys plus the main backup. So those guys, they don't really need those preseason games?
They do to a point. I mean, I think if you eliminated all 4 preseason games, it would be hard to expect the players in the NFL to be effective week 1 because they've never actually played against another team with any kind of live competition. Now, the preseason is not the regular season, but if you play a quarter or 2 of NFL action in the first 2 or 3 preseason games, at least you've gotten your feet wet. But we've seen this in the last few years where running backs don't even participate in the preseason games, and they just practice because they don't want the wear and tear on their body in meaningless games. So there is some credence to that. Like, what is the point in the first place? But at least as a starting point, we certainly don't need 4. The 4th preseason game is literally 4 second and third stringers to kind of fight out for those last 3 or 4 spots. Teams would find a way to find the answer to who they want to keep in those last few spots through practice just fine. So to me, that last game, and again, if we're talking about it from an entertainment standpoint, there is no entertainment value in the 4th preseason game.
Well, I mean,
there's 12 people in the
first 3 either.
Well, and the first maybe not, but if you are a team that just drafted a number 1 draft pick, the number 1 overall quarterback, whatever, right? You get Jared Goff a few years ago for the Rams. Now he's in the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
So his first game with the Rams wasn't the first regular season game; it was a preseason game. And that fan base was excited for his first snap, whether it was the first quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, whatever it was that year. But they're excited for that moment.
Yeah.
And if you give that guy a chance to do it in a preseason game, at least he's not being thrown to the wolves. First regular season game, you better win or else. Right out the gates. Preseason game is irrelevant as far as wins and losses. So there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with having a couple preseason games. But 4 is extreme, and I do think with the current structure, they already have Super Bowl in February, so adding another week to the season to do my idea of a bye week, or a second bye week without getting rid of preseason games would extend the season even further and make it even harder for cold weather cities to host a Super Bowl. So extending the year out doesn't make any sense, but if you get rid of the 4th preseason game, then the season stays the same length.
Okay. I mean, I guess I just come from a fan perspective, and I feel like baseball spring training is like really cool, and like a lot of fans like it, and there's something about it that's traditional but also relevant for these teams to fill out their rosters, and it's useful. But like, is there another sport where the preseason is like that? I mean, basketball preseason people don't like.
People don't really pay attention. And I would think after the first or second preseason game, nobody's really watching the NFL.
But that's only one piece of it. The other piece of it is what's useful. Like, what do the players and coaches really need? And I think that's probably going to dictate.
I would guess the majority of NFL players would be fine with keeping at least 2 preseason games. If you cut it to 2, then it just makes it a little bit more important to do well if you're a fringe player in those preseason games, and you might only get a quarter to play. Now, also the other side of it is you might not play your starters as much in those first 2 preseason games if you only had 2. And it would give those fringe players more time. So in a weird way, cutting the number of games might actually increase the percentage of time that some of the fringe players play.
And those fringe players might have significant salary on the line too, so I could see that being a big deal. My other question about this plan that you have is why do we have Thursday night football games? Like, why isn't it Friday night?
I think it's a horrible idea.
What's the deal? Is it completely for money?
I think it's 100% for money. I think it's 100% that nothing else was going on Thursdays. I think as soon as they changed the Thanksgiving game to a third game, then NFL Network and these other the other channels that own rights to the league was like, well, how else can we make some money, and how else can we get games?
But why not Friday? I mean, I guess Friday night maybe people are being entertained in other ways. Thursday night is a work night.
I think it's true. I mean, you look at the way I would look at it too is that the NBA playoffs is specifically designed. Like, there's like 3 or 4 days sometimes between games, even if games 1 and 2 are in the same city. Like, they'll get like 3 days off in between sometimes. And it's for 2 reasons. One, because they sometimes want to jam pack like 4 games in one day. And so to do a quadruple header, you need to have everyone play on the same day. And the other thing is that they've found some strategy to people watch more on Mondays or people watch more on Thursdays, and whatever those days of the week are.
Right. Yeah. And just like primetime TV.
Right. And so, and Friday and Saturday, more people are out and about. And every other day of the week, they're less likely to be out, so they're more likely to be home watching TV. So I do think there's something to that. But I also think it was more about taking ownership of Thursday the same way that Monday Night Football took ownership of Monday.
Seems like maybe Tuesday is a slightly better option, because then if you get a Tuesday game, then you get 4 days off before Sunday.
Right.
And it's still not great, though. So, but your main point is that this is just not good for the players.
Well, my main point is that they should never have to play Sunday and the following Thursday. That needs to be eliminated forever.
They never play Saturday either. Is that not?
They do play Saturday at the very end of the year.
But that's
college football is now ended. So, college football no longer has Saturday games because in December.
But is that a coordinated effort by college and pro football to like?
I don't know if it's literally coordinated, like they talk to each other, but. College football's
like a tradition.
Regular season ends around December, and then they have all their postseason in like Christmas and beyond. So those games around Christmas, the NFL has Saturday games, and I'm pretty sure it's partly because Saturdays that time of the year,
Mm-hmm.
more people are home because they're like they're like home for the holidays kind of thing.
Yeah.
So why not have NFL games Saturday and Sunday?
Okay.
And the thing is, the Dallas Cowboys were the first team to when the NFL first said let's play on Thanksgiving. Most owners at the time were like, "Oh, of course not. We want our Thanksgiving." And the Dallas Cowboys had a man that worked there at the time who was smart enough to notice. It's like, wait a minute, you're going to give me the Thursday? Like you're asking for teams to host the Thursday night Thanksgiving game, so I get a nationally televised game guaranteed every year.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah.
And that's all that the Saturday game is really too. Is that if we play on Saturdays, if we choose to have a Saturday game, then we're the only game in town.
Yeah.
Because on Sunday there's 14 games maybe.
Right.
Especially when a few years ago before Thursday night and everything else.
Yeah.
So if you got the Saturday game, you might be the only game on. So now the whole country gets to tune into your show or to your game because right now if we're right now both in LA, so we would see the Rams and Chargers every week. We don't get to see any other games really. Yeah. And so if the Rams
Just
or
to
Chargers,
clarify, we're not Los Angeles sports fans.
No,
we are in Southern California. However,
we both live in Southern California for other reasons. So, but the only way we would ever really get to see a team other than those two teams and the games they're playing is if they have a bye week or if we see a team on Monday night, Sunday night, or now Thursday. And then on the rare occasion, Saturday for the regular season, and then obviously in the postseason, you get to see every game.
Yeah.
So when teams can take advantage of that and say, "Oh, I'll be on Sunday night, or I'll be on Thursday, or I'll be on Monday," teams now realize that that's actually a golden opportunity because now you get to show your brand, and that's why teams like the Redskins, Eagles, Giants, and Cowboys, who are four of the most popular teams in the sport, why they're always on Sunday night and why they're always on Monday night whenever they're good, because the league wants to showcase them.
I wonder if there's stats on like quality of play on Thursday night, like more interceptions, more fumbles, more just.
Well, I do think that the biggest thing I noticed when it first started was that there were just more players on the injury report. And I think the biggest reason for that is because a guy who is recovering from Sunday needs at least 2 or 3 days to recover.
Yeah.
But then they're ready to finally practice on Wednesday or Thursday.
So you're adding in a second bye week before the third. Okay. Yeah.
So it'll be so the only thing that might be even a hindrance. I don't think this is a hindrance to me, but that in week 2, two teams wouldn't play. And so the season's just started, and already you're going to get a bye week. But it's a bye week because you're playing 3 days later.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily hurt anything, and you're still going to get that nationally televised game. But now you get 3 extra days to prepare for it.
Yeah.
So now, instead of having a team having to turn around, get all their scouting, figure out what their game plan is going to be for a team in 3 days, now that same Thursday night game is going to have 2 teams with 10 days to prepare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's going to be a much better organized game from the coach's standpoint, more likely to have players healthy, and then therefore should be a better product. So people that are broadcasting the Thursday night games should want this.
Yeah. Yeah.
They should want their team to be primed and ready because they've had 10 days off.
At that point, you could even put in a Wednesday night game. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, and actually,
let's not get crazy, but.
But I mean, it could be whatever day they want to be. But if you embed the bye week before it, then you don't put anyone in a position of having to play twice. Yeah.
I'm on board.
In 3 days. So
should we go to the next thing?
Yeah. So what's your next one?
We need like a explosion of sound of some kind, or like
we'll get like a ring like in the end of the round.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So
we'll edit that in, guys. So
yeah, we're gonna work on that. This is our first one, so it's a little dicey. All right. So the next thing is So we just had this situation. This is not necessarily based on this specifically, but we had this situation in the Saints-Rams championship game where the Saints were threatening, and the Rams defender just comes in and just cleans out the Saints wide receiver. Was it the wide receiver? And there's no pass interference call. People are like, what the hell? And I didn't see it live, but I went back and looked at the video. And I don't have a team in this. I'm not a big fan of either team, but I'm just like, how do you miss that? Like, that's just crazy. And referees are human beings, so that's why they missed it. But anyway, so in this day and age of technology, I feel like there's more solutions than ever to this kind of situation. Pass interference is like it's like a blocking foul in basketball or something. It's really it's a judgment call, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a lot of human judgment that goes into those calls, but that makes it tough. And so my thought was to try to bring in technology. We have every kind of camera in every corner of every stadium in the NFL in particular. In college a lot of times we do too. So maybe we can rig something up so that that's helpful. And we also have these devices that can track how many steps a guy moves during a game, or if we can track the impact. So my idea for a pass interference call would be like to track the impact. Like, okay, there was the timing of the arrival of the ball, there was the timing of the hit, there was the impact of the hit. Like there's some sort of physics equation that could probably go into like, okay, that was X amount of force that the guy was hit with. It went this direction and the timing was that. And so if the timing of the hit comes before the ball arrives and it's past a certain level of force, then a horn goes off in the stadium and it's pass interference, whether the referee there calls it or not. So that's like not even having a referee there. That would be essentially a robot situation or technology situation. We could back that up and still have the referee make the call and then have an instant replay of some kind.
Right.
But I hesitate on that because the more instant replays you have, they're not actually instant. So it's going to slow the game way down. To have too many of those, I don't think fans will like that. So maybe in 50 years, we have this technology situation. We don't have any referees anymore. But it would be a really slow process, I think, to try to get the technology tested out, maybe at the lower levels of football. The process may not even... it could be even worse at first, right? The robots calling wild calls that people wouldn't have even, thought of. So
well, and I don't know if I don't think maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think you're necessarily talking about literal robots like on the field replacing the human referees.
That's just my code for technology making the call.
But I do think though that I could be wrong on some of the details here, but I'm pretty sure that for the most part in practice every day, the Golden State Warriors wear gear during practice that monitors how they're physically performing. And to go to the kind of technology you're talking about, if there was something embedded in the home jerseys and away jerseys or whatever that the players are wearing to where you could identify, when contact was made, because you can literally gather that information, then that's where you can start to get some of that instant replay. Yeah. Where if a referee thinks there's pass interference, then it goes to you go to the tape and you check the stats of those two players and you see if it happened before, and you can do that with block charge calls in the NBA where, it's like if they're wearing that, kind of identifiers that it's like, nope, actually it turns out the defender got there in time, it's a charge.
Right. We really have to play test these things though,
Well, and so, maybe it's in the CFL or maybe it's in, the Division II college football. Or maybe there's some independent league that's trying to start out.
Or the NFL preseason.
Or the NFL preseason. The NFL preseason would be a perfect time to incorporate some new things that might seem extreme to try it out, because you don't want to just implement this kind of stuff immediately. You want to be able to test it, but at the same time, you should try to test it in the best circumstances possible. And live action is always going to be the best way to do that.
So here's another
a college bowl series season. College bowls are irrelevant, right? They're the only ones that matter are the championship ones.
That's a topic for another video,
right? By the way. But they're completely irrelevant. So the team, if two teams that are 6-5 playing in the Hawaiian Punch Bowl, decide. Is
that really a bowl?
Yeah, well, I actually played in one that was called the Hawaiian Punch Bowl in college, but which is why I chose that. But
did you guys win?
We lost in overtime in some horrible overtime rules that we'll get to shortly. But the idea that that game's irrelevant. The only thing it's for is to promote those two teams and those two conferences to try to recruit more players, because now they have another nationally televised game. And so winning can matter, but you can also certainly test some of those kind of things while playing in that game, because ultimately you could test it without actually using it for changing the rules in that specific game. Like you can just test it to see if you can get accurate results. And then use that data to decide if you want to go further with it.
There's an in-between idea, which is to you have the guys in New York or whoever. That's what they do in which baseball.
Baseball, yeah.
You go to the guys in New York. And
well, and in NBA too, right? They go to Secaucus.
Right, wherever they are. So then you just have that be the only thing. Like, so for example, in the pass interference call, there's no live referee, whatever. But maybe there's more than a couple of guys. Maybe there's like 100 guys in the truck, whatever it is. And like as soon as the play comes along, they have these huge TVs, whatever, great HD quality. Right. They see the play, and then they all ring in. There's 100 guys, and if more than 50% of them say that it was pass interference, then the horn sounds in the ballpark, and you have the
I do think that logistically, a game's going to be run smoother if there's human referees on the field of play to manage the personalities. Again, we mentioned at the top of the show as a Golden State Warriors fan. So I get to experience Draymond Green, 100 times a year. And now DeMarcus Cousins. And if they didn't have someone to yell and scream at, then the game would be significantly different.
That would be good.
And maybe better.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, football.
They might start yelling at fans though. That'd be worse.
Start yelling at the machine, like, you stupid machine.
The one thing I would want to say to preface what you were talking about is that one thing about the MLB and NBA replays is that when they go to New York or when they go to, it's kind of like going to Oz, where it's like, who's behind the curtain,
right? Yeah.
And there's no accountability whatsoever for who's actually behind the curtain. Yeah. And I think fans, even if fans go to the extreme sometimes with referees when they make a bad call and do things that are, just as vile, whether it's social media or whatever, to be able to have someone to be like, I disagree with that person versus I disagree with whoever came up with that. Yeah. Sometimes it's better to have something physical to look at or someone to be like, okay, this person made this decision.
Yes, but I think I'm ready for machines. I don't know. It just seems like when you get that pass interference call.
You're a tennis guy, and I've said to you a few times before that tennis's replay is one of the best replays in the world for in and out.
Almost always, yes.
Because when it's used quickly, efficiently, and the technology is good enough that there's rarely ever a mistake. And even if it's close, it's like, it's close, and maybe I don't agree with the computer, but you know what? I'll get the next one, I'm sure, and whatever. It's but it's quick, it's efficient, and it is instant. It's one of the only replays that I've ever seen that actually feels instant.
But the thing about that is that it's in or out. The ball is either in or it's out. And in a pass interference call or in a holding or what else do we have in football that's very subjective? I mean, roughing the passer.
Fumbles and
I mean, it's really a judgment call. Right. So that's why this whole thing is a challenge, whether you stick with the live people or whether you go to
and it's going to be imperfect. I think the what fans want is efficient and they want consistency first and foremost. Even if a referee's bad, if they're bad both ways, then it kind of nullifies out and fans don't get as upset. It's like, the refereeing is bad, not the referees are out for my team. Yeah. Right. So I think that consistency, even if it's bad, consistency is sometimes the number one thing. But efficiency and not, when two teams are sitting around for 10 minutes, because they can't make a decision, it almost doesn't matter what the decision ends up being. Those players that were playing with some momentum they've cooled down, they've lost all their momentum. Then the rest of the game is going to feel different, no matter what the result is, even if it's in your favor.
I still like the 100 guys in the truck idea. You know what I'm saying? Or it doesn't
I just want
100. It could be
I just want to see a truck that can fit 100 people, because that truck would be amazing.
I mean, it's the guy. They're never not in a truck. They're always in a truck, right? Anyway, but I do kind of like the idea of having multiple eyes on one situation, right? So if that one referee calls the pass interference, and then his 5 referee buddies are like, "No, you're crazy," then that can happen pretty quickly. Right. It's sort of like the college football committee that selects the 4 playoff participants, right? Right. We went to machines for a while with the system. Right. Didn't really work. So then we were back to the committee, but it's not just one guy or girl. It's like, a few, and then they kind of come to a consensus. With referee calls, you don't want to deliberate so long on the consensus, right? But if you have some sort of instant button that they can press in the truck, and then like if the majority says it was a call, then that's what they go
Well,
with.
What was it? Who wants to win $1 million or whatever?
Mm-hmm. You just
ask the audience, boom,
yeah,
you find the answer right away. It's
Absolutely.
like,
but you don't want anybody. I mean, you want trained
well,
referees.
I know that I understand, but I mean, like going back to your original point was we have this technology. We have technology to do way more efficiently than we've been doing.
Right.
And,
absolutely. And when there's millions of dollars, and I mean, I think there were a couple of Saints fans that tried to file a lawsuit to replay the game or something.
Well, I saw. I mean,
people care.
It was a brief video, but I saw a video of Drew Brees, and I think they were asking who he liked in the Super Bowl, and he looked like someone had shot his puppy, and someone kind of did, because how many more MVP type seasons does he have left? Yeah. Maybe this was his last best chance to get to a Super Bowl.
Maybe.
He was on the verge of getting there, and even though one call doesn't guarantee that the complete opposite would have happened, but they were on the verge of scoring.
Yeah.
And if you make that call, it's a fresh set of downs, and they have a much better chance of winning.
Yeah.
So the idea then, no matter how else you look at it, it feels like something was taken from you. Yeah. And that's not how the NFL or any sport should be, where a whole entire fan base feels like they were cheated.
Yeah, and again, we're not just reacting to this one call, but just in general, refereeing issues. And I have some, I think this robot idea might be better served in other sports too. Certainly baseball is considering it, I think, a little bit more these days. So anyway, should we move?
Well, and to your point about how tennis is just in or out, what's in the strike zone and what's not. So we'll save that for another day. But so the next one that I had was
100 guys in the truck. That's what or they could be ladies,
that's what we should just call the rule, is 100 guys in the truck.
Yeah, right.
So let's go to the overtime. Because that was another one that was timely.
Yeah.
Kansas City Chiefs were the latest victim of the current overtime rules, where it's sudden death if the other team scores a touchdown.
Yeah. And
so for the third time in recent history, and third time since this rule has been changed to first team that scores a touchdown wins instead of just first team that scores.
They had good intentions with that rule, but
right, and I do think there's something to this is better than a team can just get in field goal range. Mm-hmm. And I know from personal experience, go back to what I was saying before, that the college football system, while it's exciting, to me, especially in college and NFL, is terrible.
It's because pure chaos.
But it's because if you go 3 and out. If you ever go 3 and out, the other team is now already in field goal range, and so the other team has to do literally nothing to basically win the game. They can go 3 and out and kick a field goal and win. Yeah. So if you go 3 and out and miss a field goal, you've now set the other team up for almost a give me win. Mm-hmm. And that's not how a game that's lasted 60 plus minutes should end. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of any version of sudden death or any version of let's just start at the 25 to me is silly. So what I would like to change it to is similar to how the NBA goes from a 12-minute quarter to a 5-minute quarter for the overtime, is to go from 15 minutes to 8. And 8's not a number I'm
7.5
exactly. The number is kind of irrelevant, but if it's an 8-minute overtime, then in the regular season, if the score is still tied after 8 minutes, it's a tie, no big deal. But in the playoffs, then you have as many 8-minute overtimes as you need for someone to end the winner.
Yeah.
And so that could mean that a team might score 3 touchdowns in those 8 minutes. Who knows?
Do you still have a coin toss at the beginning?
Yeah, I think it's fine to still have the coin toss, but that coin toss now is not anywhere near as relevant. Now, if a team drives the ball for 7 minutes...
this is going to be my question, is if you have a team that wins the coin toss, mm-hmm. they decide to just grind it out and do a bunch of running plays and run the clock, and then the other team never gets the ball. Is that a usual scenario? Is that something we should... I think there's two different things here, because that scenario could happen in the same situation we have now, because the overtime rules as of now are it's another 15-minute period. Mm-hmm. So a team technically could take 8 minutes driving down the field. Yeah. Now, the one thing about what we just saw was that
the Patriots got a couple third down conversions,
Yeah.
and so they had a long drive to get to the end zone.
Yeah.
And so the same result could have happened.
Yeah.
But if there's any time on the clock,
Yeah.
the other team should be given a chance.
But so why 7.5 or 8 as opposed to 15?
The only reason I'm fine with doing another 15-minute period.
Yeah.
The only reason I would say 8 is because, especially, and then it goes back to the health in football, I'm fine with it being a few less minutes. And 8 minutes is more of a sense of urgency than 15. So 8 minutes might be a little bit more exciting because if you have a 5-minute drive that results in any points, now that other team only has a few minutes to get back down.
Yeah.
So there is, and to your point, if a team goes 7.5 minutes to get into field goal range, now they've basically won because there's like 30 seconds left for the other team, but at least they have that 30 seconds. And if, when Tom Brady scored, or when the Patriots scored, that, Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs would have had it some time on the clock to go back the other way. And for your point, because of let's say the rule was 8 minutes, if Tom Brady takes 7 minutes and 52 seconds to get into the 1 yard line and then they score, then good job by them. Yeah. And they did still keep them off the field. But I feel like we saw it in the Super Bowl where Matt Ryan, who was the Falcons quarterback, didn't touch the ball in the overtime because the Patriots went down and scored a touchdown. And it happened a couple years earlier with that Aaron Rodgers sitting on the sideline against the Seahawks. So, the NFL is about entertainment as much as anything else. And wouldn't it be more entertaining if both teams had a shot? Sure. And so whether that's a team taking a 15-minute drive and nullifying it or 8-minute drive and nullifying it, they had to earn all those minutes. They had to earn all those third down conversions. That other defense then didn't do anything well. And that, the one thing about the Chiefs Patriots game was the Chiefs gave up a lot of third downs that had they just stopped them once, then we don't have this conversation maybe as urgently in some fan bases or in some people's cases about the Chiefs fans wouldn't be as upset if they had just stopped them once.
Right. So so my alternative would if I mentioned 15 minutes. Okay. So what about so Tom Brady whatever goes down, they score a touchdown. Then the Chiefs get one possession, just as if because currently if the Patriots were to kick a field goal, then the Chiefs would have got the ball and had a chance, right?
Then they get
just had one chance.
the one possession, yeah.
Right. So, but suppose Brady goes down and scores, then the same rule applies, and the Chiefs get one chance. They have to score a touchdown, or else they're done. So it's not a time thing so much as a guaranteed one possession per team thing, because really what we're talking about here is we got to make sure that Aaron Rodgers gets on the field in that scenario, or Matt Ryan gets on the field in that scenario. So if we guarantee them one possession, then. And then if both teams score, the play continues, and then maybe it's sudden death after that.
Yeah, I'm fine with them just simply changing it to no matter what the first team does, the second team gets a shot. Yeah. So if the first team scores a touchdown, the other team still gets the ball. Yeah. And then they just have the one possession. I'm fine with that. I do think, though, in a football sense, you give them a certain amount of minutes in overtime, and you play those minutes. The idea, baseball has the walk-off, hit.
Yeah.
The NBA can have a game-winning shot.
Yeah.
The NFL only is going to have a walk-off touchdown if it's the last few seconds of the fourth quarter or if it's an overtime.
Yeah.
And granted, it's exciting as anything to see a touchdown as time expires, or to see a touchdown, or even a field goal. A field goal is very boring, but a field goal in the closing seconds is exciting, for the team that makes it. And so, yes, that is exciting. And adding walk-off wins to a sport is a great thing. At the same time, I do think that the sudden death style of the NFL is ridiculous. And that even though it can breed, walk-off wins, and any walk-off win is amazing for that fan base, that to me, you could still have that walk-off winning in the final minutes of overtime versus versus a sudden death.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on board. I guess I don't see. I think a lot of fans would be satisfied with the each team is guaranteed at least one possession,
right,
followed by sudden death if necessary scenario too. So I guess that would be my counter, but it's not really. It's accomplishing a similar thing to what you're talking about, giving both teams a chance generally, and then letting the end of overtime be the end of overtime, and having it be a little bit more of a fair conclusion. So I'm on board.
Because the other thing is that, let's say both teams score a touchdown.
Yeah,
and,
then it keeps going.
And you've run out of time. It's like then what do you do? And to me, it's like that's where, if you just have time.
Yeah, that's when you need to play defense, because someone needs to play
Well, and defense is going to be harder to play the longer you go. You go into triple and quadruple overtime. Yeah. Your defenses are getting a little bit more tired.
Becomes like 72-70 at the end.
Right, exactly. And that is exciting. I'll grant you that if I've ever watched a college football overtime, that it is exciting to watch. Every one of those plays feels like it's the last play of the game. So there's absolute edge of your seat excitement with that. And again, if you're going back from just an entertainment standpoint, anytime you can get a fan on the edge of their seat because they with bated breath, they're like, oh my God, hockey playoff overtime is exciting. Mm-hmm. No matter what someone thinks of hockey playoff overtime, every shot feels like that's the game. Mm-hmm. And because every shot is so quick, it's like your heart skips a beat when you're watching, the hockey at that level.
Yeah, I don't watch much hockey these days, but I see.
Well, and I don't watch hockey much at all either. But anytime I've ever watched playoff hockey and they've gone to overtime, you get on the edge of your seat even if you don't like the sport. And so I do think that any sport, and you see with the World Cup, if you go into extra minutes and extra time,
those penalty kicks, man, I don't know about that. That's a topic for another video, maybe. We don't have quite.
But again, penalty kicks are nowhere near as exciting as the actual game action. As far, some people would just prefer probably penalty kicks because soccer can be boring.
That's like the Chiefs and the Patriots going into a field goal showdown at the end of the game.
Right, exactly.
For the first team to miss a field goal and lose the game? Can you imagine that? That's no good. Anyway,
but I do think though that ultimately when we go back to what we're saying is that you want to give both teams a shot. Mm-hmm. And even if it's a slim shot, because now the team scored a touchdown, so now they're going to kick it to you. You're going to have the ball at the 20, and you have to drive 80 yards, and you have to score a touchdown. Mm-hmm. That's a really hard thing to do in the NFL at any time.
At least you have a chance.
But at least you're given the chance. Yeah. So I do think there's got to be some changes to that.
Yeah. Okay.
What was your next topic?
I was just going to say that can you believe in the past that they let college football teams tie and not even go to overtime? That's
I know, right? For a lot of years, and then even in bowls.
No. How did people put up with that for so many years?
Well, and how about just AP voting and that's it? Like,
oh my gosh.
Your Penn State goes undefeated and doesn't win the national title or doesn't even share in it, and it's like we won literally every game we played. How are we not
at least we've made some progress.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so one more for me, and then I think you have a few more over there. The one more on my list was just halfway through the season, you get a team that's 0-8 or 2-6 or whatever, and maybe it's even sooner than halfway through the season for some teams. They lose their first 6 games, whatever it is. They feel like they're done, like the playoff picture is it's gone for that particular year, right. And you got 8 games left. And your fans have 8 games left. And I think this might be an issue as much for the fans as for the players, as far as like, okay, I'm a fan of the Sacramento Kings. This is basketball we're talking about. But for just about every year, the last 10 or 12 years, comes March, and the team is out of the playoff picture. And I'm not really watching games as much, even though I'm a loyal fan. So, the 49ers, was it last year? They got off to a slow start. They had a really strong finish, but that really strong finish was under the presumption that they were out of the playoff picture. Right? So that's cool for them. They build momentum to next year. Theoretically, if they had tanked those last 5 games instead of winning them all, then they might have got a better draft position, and that might have been better for their future, arguably. I don't think teams in the NFL are actively tanking at all, but it's worth conversation as far as what do we do with that team that is struggling and out of the playoff picture halfway through the season? So for the fans and for the players and for everybody's sake. So the players, are they just playing for their contracts at that point, or what are they doing? So I don't have a particular solution for this, but I was thinking maybe there's some incentive there, like the team that is 0-8 to start with, maybe that second half record could earn them something, an extra draft pick, or some sort of extra money for free agents or something like that.
Right.
We could do something more extreme where we cap the first half at a certain record, and then we stop, and then we record second half records, and then we allow some playoff spots, or at least one playoff spot to go to a team that finishes strong.
Well, and that's not unprecedented. That's minor league baseball does that. We have a first half winner and a second half winner, and those two winners face off against each other. And if it's the same team, if one team has the best record in both halves, then the second best team plays them. Yeah. And I think we were mentioning this before we started, that I think that could be a solution, is that the team with the best second half record in the NFC and the AFC make the playoffs. And if it's a team that already made the playoffs, then nothing changes.
I just don't know how I feel about it.
And if a team goes 8-0 and they wouldn't have made they wouldn't have made the playoffs because they were 2-6 before that, and there were teams with better records ahead of them. Yeah. Then they they wouldn't have gone to the playoffs. Right. But in this case, they would.
So what's the deal with that? So there's supposed in an extreme scenario, there's an 0-8 team.
Right.
Then they go 8-0, and they're 8-8.
Right.
And then there's a 9-7 team that was
there's a 9-7 team that went 9-7.
1-7.
They didn't go 8-0. Right.
Right. They didn't go 8-0 in the second half, and they lose out on that playoff spot to the team that was 0-8 and then 8-0. So that
I look at it a couple things. A team that's 9, because this is what I look at it like. Right now, college football is flawed. One of the things we'll talk about when we do college football episode is that 4 teams is probably too small for playoffs, and that if you did 8 or 16
or 256
as we'll get to, stay tuned. But if we
not even sure that there are that many teams.
If we do 8 or 16, the one reason that I would love to do that. To come back to this idea in a second, is the 9th place team and the 17th place team have a lot less room for argument than the 5th place team. Because the 5th place team in college football these days usually has either 0 losses or 1 loss, whether it's a mid-major or whether it's a powerhouse team that only has 1 loss, but they just they can't compete against the undefeated teams. So that 5th place team is usually a team that gets pretty screwed. Yeah. And they've probably won their conference, and they don't get to play for anything. Yeah. So there's a lot of 5th place teams in the last few years that have a real gripe as to not being part of that process. So if you have a 9-7 team that didn't win as many games in the second half as a team that went 8-8, but they've won their last 8 games,
that would be quite an accomplishment.
I would it's the extreme, but I also look at it this way. You only did 1 game better than that other team. Yeah. And the 8-8 team is hotter. Yeah. So if you're looking at it from a standpoint of what's the ultimate goal of the playoffs is to have the best teams compete for a championship. Yeah. The team that's got on an 8-game winning streak is better than the 9-7 team. Yeah. And I think it's safe to say that even if they're not overall in 16 weeks or 17 weeks better, they've proven that in the last 8 weeks they're better, which means they're more likely to give the other 5 teams a better game than the team that was 9-7 and maybe went 6-2 or 5-3.
So you would say maybe 1 spot in each conference, like the second wild card, let's say, for that team that was like the best in the second half.
Well, and one thing, and we can just jump this idea, this topic into this one. Yeah, sure. Because I had another idea about the playoffs, which is that the 4 division winners can get into the playoffs, but that shouldn't be the top 4 seeds if their records don't allow it. Yeah, okay. Right. The extreme being the 2010 Seahawks, who were 7-9, and two different 10-6 teams didn't make the playoffs that year. The Giants and Buccaneers, because the Seahawks were 7-9 and won their bad division. And then they got a home game against the 11-5 Saints. Yeah. And they beat them by 3 points. And like we said before the show, had they played in the New Orleans, maybe Seattle loses that game, and then that makes it a much better, obviously the Saints are happier, but a 7-9 team having to go on the road is not an extreme thing.
But we're turning in this whole show into how to help the New Orleans Saints, basically.
Right, a couple different ways. It just so happens that New Orleans has gotten screwed a couple different ways. But then to go back to our idea about an 8-0 team or a 7-1 team that overall their record isn't as strong, but they were the best team overall. Yeah. That it's a way of the sixth place team that would the team that would have been the sixth seed in the postseason probably isn't as good right now as that team that has the best record. And now, if a team goes 13-3 or 14-2, they probably won the most games in the second half,
right.
And so then you don't have any changes.
That's a moot point. Yeah.
You know, so to me, I look at it like if the only times this would happen, the only times this would even occur, where you'd have to do a change, is if a team if a team gets real hot and does better than every other team in football.
Yeah. Well, or at least in the conference. We could say the conference.
Well, if they're playing better than another team that made the playoffs because they're 10-6, but this team is 9-7, but they're 7-1 in their last 8 games, then that team is playing better.
Yeah.
So I think it's better for the playoffs. It's better for to me, it's a way to completely solve your tanking problem. Because now every single team, no matter what their record is at the midway point, goes into week 9 thinking this is our year. And to the Niners example, Jimmy Garoppolo comes over to the team, and they don't play him for a couple weeks to get him acclimated to the team. Then he comes on the field, starts playing, and they win every game. In this scenario, maybe they rush him onto the field because they're trying to win, trying to have the best record in those last 8 games, and maybe that has some bad consequences. But what if it didn't? What if he won those games too, and they finished the season 7-1? Even though I think they were 0-8, right? So that would have been your outlier. There's a team that went 0-8. They end up going 7-9 for the season, but they're 7-1 in their last 8 games. That team deserves to be in the playoffs to me. And if 7-1 was the best 8-game record in the second half, why wouldn't you want that team going into the playoffs? And those 5 teams they have to play against don't want to face them. And so it would also eliminate some of those games the last few weeks of the season where a team like, if in that case, the 11-win Saints in 2010, maybe they have to play, or not the 11-win Saints because they obviously, got the 6th seed, but maybe a 13-win team is playing their hearts out during week 16 against a bad team or whatever, instead of resting all their guys because they want to make sure that other team doesn't get in the playoffs, or they want to make sure they get the best record in the second half so that they can set themselves up even better. So you're more likely to get more competitive games the second half of the season, which goes again to what your original thought was.
Roger Goodell. I know you're watching. Book is that's his name. Well, Roger Goodell.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But
sometimes I get him mixed up with
Pete
Rozelle.
We've also seen it. We've also seen it in minor league baseball that they do that. Now, minor league baseball, one of the reasons I think they do that is because players are constantly moving in baseball. So it's very likely a team could be very young and very inexperienced their first half of the season. By the second half,
they're just different.
They've got a completely different group of players. They're a completely different team. So it does make sense for that. And to me, John Smoltz had brought it up about maybe baseball doing the same thing, but at the major league level. And when you really hear his reasoning, I think it's the same thing we're saying, is that you're ultimately going to have a better chance that you have the best teams. The Tampa Bay Rays, just stick with baseball for a second. The Tampa Bay Rays were one of the best teams in baseball the second half of last year, and they didn't make the playoffs. And had there been a second half,
and people didn't even really notice that they were that good because they were so far down.
Initially, and the Red Sox were so far ahead. It'd be like if the Patriots were 8-0 to start the year, then no one's paying attention to anyone else in the AFC East. But if the Jets were to go 8-0 in the second half, suddenly people would wake up to that a lot more. So again, to go to your point about the Sacramento Kings and how for 10 or 12 years, the season ends in mid-April.
It feels like 100 years, but
but the season ends April 15th, and you're stopping watching March 1st.
Maybe
that's not
February
good. That's
1st.
Not good for the product. That's not good for the sport. And so this would be a way of, at least for some teams, because if a team goes, 1-10 or 1-11, now they know they're not going to win the second half either. So now, yes, they might tank those last 4 games.
So I have a thought on that too.
Okay, so go for it.
The draft is currently in reverse order of record. Is that right?
Yes.
And there's no lottery. So the team with the
for the NFL,
for the NFL, there's no lot. So then the team with the worst record gets the best pick.
Right.
I can't stand it. I mean, it's just like, the NBA at least has the lottery, right? But even so, I don't like that rule. It just rewards teams for being bad. I'm speaking as a Sacramento Kings fan, a fan of a
Right.
team that's in the 49ers too, that they've been bad in recent years. I don't
Right.
think
You wouldn't complain about getting the first pick,
I don't think the
but at
teams
the same time,
deserve that necessarily. That's like, oh, let's be bad for a period of years so that we can get a bunch of picks. It just doesn't. It doesn't
Well, and that's
necessarily.
what the Cubs and Astros did. In
Yeah,
baseball,
in baseball.
They on purpose tanked for a few years so they could get draft picks.
So I mean, I think you could go with second half record, maybe the best second half record, getting the first pick in the draft. But then we've already built in kind of a nice idea for incentivizing the best record. So
Right.
maybe the team with the next best record or something like that gets because then that team that's 8-0, they make the playoffs, so they're taken care of.
I hadn't thought of this until you just brought that up. You could almost do a reverse order, where so in the NFL, and since we'll just stick with the NFL for now, 32 teams, only 12 make the playoffs.
Yeah.
The way you just determine the 20 teams that didn't make the playoffs,
The next best team,
the 20th worst record, gets the first pick, and the 20th best,
Right.
so the team that would normally get the first pick actually gets the 20th pick.
But I think you also could do it by second half record.
And
maybe
so
we're
and so
splitting hairs.
I think there's some. I mean, obviously, a team so that the Browns won 0 games a couple years in a row. I mean, there was a stretch there where the Browns were just hideous for so long.
Yeah.
And so to give them the 20th pick a couple years in a row because they were terrible, is kind of unfair.
Yeah.
Like they kind of deserve the first pick
But
because
they kind of don't. I don't know.
Well,
like,
I mean,
how do we want to help teams?
Yeah, I guess.
You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
I mean, the whole initial reason for the reverse order was you don't want teams to be bad for a decade or for 20
You want to
years.
help the fan base.
You want to help. You want to give the fan base hope that
which is
I was
nice.
listening to.
I'm on board.
Speaking of podcasts, I was listening to the Woj Pod. It was a basketball podcast, and he was talking about how he thought that the Memphis Grizzlies did it right, where they were competing for playoffs and championships for years and years with Marc Gasol and Mike Conley, and then they did really bad one year. They get a guy in Jackson who looks like he could be a real difference maker. And so hopefully now they don't have to be in the lottery for years and years and years because they hit on a pick. If you hit on a top 5 pick, the Dallas Mavericks were kind of floundering for a while. Now they got Luka Doncic, so they hit on a pick. Even your Sacramento Kings, by getting De'Aaron Fox, you've hit a home run on a pick. So now you're less likely to be in that lottery year after year after year. So if the Browns hit on Baker Mayfield, then maybe they're not going to be terrible now for anymore. So that would be the reason to not change anything with the draft because I think that then would ultimately make it harder for bad teams to get better. And if they were to fire everyone and bring in a new regime, it's not necessarily fair for that new regime to be given the 20th pick because their team.
Well, so maybe there's
terrible.
something else. Okay, so maybe we don't. Maybe we give them the 20th pick, but then we give them something else, like a stipend for for financial aid kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, okay, your team is bad, and maybe
they have a few more million to spend in free agency.
Maybe the fans aren't coming out, or maybe the people aren't watching on TV. You're losing some revenue there, right? So maybe you give them some financial aid somewhere in there that it's not the draft. I mean, I guess maybe again we're splitting hairs because we're giving them something, whether it's a player or whether it's money. The money might eventually turn into a player or something like that. But maybe you give them money not for players, but for the stadium or for something else.
The 10 worst teams are given $10 million. And they get to distribute that to their season ticket holders as an apology for being so terrible.
There you go.
So they get their tickets half refunded.
Just like an upgrade on stadium food.
Having to watch terrible.
You just give them like a bunch of coupons to the taco stand or something. I don't know. Just something.
99 cents of Jack in the Box.
There you go. Yeah, something to keep their interest, right? But you see how excited NBA fans get if their team scores 100 points and they get free tacos. Free tacos every game, every game. No good draft picks, but every game you get free tacos. Something for the fans, and then it's the responsibility of the organization. I feel like to make the decisions to get the better players in there with the resources that they have. Free gifts in the draft, it just doesn't seem right to me, but. Anyway, I'm not proposing we give.
I do think that the idea of having the team with the best second half record being guaranteed a playoff spot then and seeding them according to record and not because so if that team was to be 8-8, then they would get the 6th seed. They wouldn't get the fourth seed for being the number 1 team.
Right.
But I think that would encourage all 32 teams that from week 9 it's like starting over.
Yeah.
And one thing to go back to the thought about having 2 bye weeks, maybe that would be a secondary way of doing the bye week, is you have a bye week after week 8 for all teams. And you give them all a week off, and that second half push gets an extra week to prepare. So now you've got every team that might have had someone like Jimmy Garoppolo. Let's say he's out for 2 months, so he misses the first 8 games, but he can come back the second week. So the second half of the season. So that team would really think we have a legitimate shot at winning, 7 or 8 games in the second half because they've had some injuries and those guys are getting healthy. Right. So it's, if a team goes 0-8 because their best players are hurt, Tom Brady gets hurt, Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, Matt Ryan gets hurt, whoever, then that second half really can feel like a completely different season if there is incentive for that team to fight for those wins. Instead of just what Garoppolo did, which was, we got some momentum next year. And the 49er fan base was super excited about this coming season, which turned out to be bad because Garoppolo got hurt again. Or got hurt. He hadn't been hurt before, but got hurt. And so that changed everything. But they went into that season expecting the playoffs because they were so excited about how they ended the year 5-0. Well, if that 5-0 had actually led to a playoff appearance, then, you have one of the hottest teams in the league getting a chance to play. So
makes sense. Okay. What else we got? Should we go on?
Well, so the last one I have is...
How long have we been doing this? Has it been 6 hours long? It was light when we started. Now it's dark outside.
Well, this one's important to me, though.
Okay, I'm ready.
I have been very adamant that the NFL has no idea what a catch is.
Okay, yeah.
They have absolutely no clue. So we're going to do 2 things really simply. It should take me about a minute to explain. It's
the internet. We have all the time.
I'm going to fix it right now.
Okay,
fix it just right now.
Ready.
The 2 things I see with what a catch is that is ridiculous is when a guy is about to go out of bounds, they've got 2 feet in, holding the ball. The current rule, as far as I know it, unless these things have changed, because I haven't been watching as much in the last couple of years, is that if the ball moves at all at any point after he does that, and he were to land on the ground and the ball falls out, it's considered not a catch.
Okay. So the coach on the sideline can come over and just knock it out.
Exactly.
Okay.
That to me is completely asinine.
Okay.
If a guy's got 2 feet in with the ball gripped, that's a catch no matter what happens after that. So to me, the first rule fix is 2 feet in with the ball, it's a catch no matter what happens after.
Is it still 1 foot in college?
I think it's still 1 foot in college, but it's 2 feet. It's 2 feet in the NFL.
Okay.
And if a guy's got 2 feet in the ball, it's a catch 10 times out of 10, no matter what happens after. So that's that. The other thing that happens all the time is they screw up on when the ball's near the ground. And to me, and I can use my phone as an example, if my hands are under the ball, that even if the phone touches the ground,
let's get this.
So even if the phone's touching the table, but my hands are under it, to me that's a catch. Because you've got your hands under the ball. So even if the football, the nose of the football is touching the earth, your hands are under it, so to me that's still a catch. And if it's fumbled or moves around a little bit, or even the ground causes it to move, if your hands are under it and the ball were to move like this, but your hands are still under it, to me that's a catch. Because you've got underneath the ball, and that those 2 things don't have to be complicated.
My question is,
by the idea that did the ball move at all, it's so much harder even with the technology we have to determine that for sure. And even if you could determine, okay, I saw the ball move, if the guy's got hands on it, why does that matter? And to me, the proof of that is any normal human being go play catch with a 50-mile-an-hour football thrown at you and tell me you can keep it from moving. Because the greatest athletes in the world with the best hands on earth, most of the time can grip that ball with their, stick-em gloves pretty well most of the time. But the ball moves sometimes. And to me, if your hands are on it, who cares? It should not matter at all. that the ball is moving a little bit if your hands are on it. Now, if you have one hand on it, or you kind of sort of have a hand near it, and it hits the ground, then it's not a catch, and then that's fine. But if you've got two hands under it, then it shouldn't matter what else is going on, because you've got possession of the ball. The ball is with you more than it's not. Well, and to me, that's all a catch should be, does the guy have the ball or does he not? And whether the ball moves or not is completely irrelevant to me versus where is his body to the ball.
Was there a recent instance where this was called in a way that didn't make sense, and this has spurred you toward this?
The first example, there was, whether there was the Calvin Johnson rule or whether it was the Des Bryant catch against the Packers or any catch like that where they had the ball and they were moving with the ball and then the ball fell, 3.5 hours later. Calvin Johnson catches the ball, gets both feet in the end zone, rolls around for 2 minutes, and then the ball pops out. Somehow,
2 minutes. That's a long time.
This has been a little extreme.
Okay.
But if, long enough that it's ridiculous to think because the ball fell out then that somehow it's now not a catch, or that Des Bryant catches it, rolls, and then the ball pops out, that it's not a catch.
Is this the same in high school and college football? Or is this just some weird thing about the pros?
Well, I know in college it's 1 foot in bounds, so that's one difference.
But then if the ball, if your hands are under it in college,
I'm not up to date on if they've made changes.
Well,
I know that the idea of 2 feet in, have the ball, and then roll out of bounds and the ball falls out. As far as I know, that's just the NFL.
Okay.
I know that was never an issue in high school. But part of that is there's no instant replay in high school because there's not enough cameras. They don't have any official camera. So the idea that you would even be able to identify that the ball fell out 30 seconds later.
Okay, so here's my other question.
Is much harder.
If a guy in baseball is going back for the fly ball and he jumps up and he catches it and he falls over the wall and the ball pops out, like when he's on the ground, let's say, or like as he's in the process of falling over the wall, is it a home run? It's a home run, right? Well,
in baseball, I would think that if the ball doesn't come back, it's a home run.
Yeah.
Right? And if the ball comes back, it's
But then if he's in the stand, let's say there's a fan in the stand, he jumps over the wall, maybe on a foul ball.
I think if you can
falling
prove
into the stands and the fan is like,
I think if you can prove that fans hit the ball out. Then to me, I can justify that was a catch.
Well, but if he's in the stand, like if he's literally like in the lap of the fan.
Right, he fell into the stands and the ball falls out afterwards. Yeah. I would argue for the exact same reason I'm arguing about this, that he had the ball as he was going out of bounds. Yeah. He had the ball in his glove as he's going out of bounds. Then after that happened, then a fan or whatever knocked the ball out. Yeah. To me, that would still count as a catch. Yeah. In the same way that if a guy's diving for a ball and it goes into his glove, and then as he jumps up, the momentum of that, the ball flies out of his glove, that to me would still be a catch. Yeah. Now, if the ball never really spent any time in the glove and it skips in and out, then you can say that wasn't a catch. Right. Okay. But to me, if it's in the glove and then gets popped out, that's a catch. Yeah. And the same with football. Yeah. If you've got your hands on it or even one hand on it, but you've got a grip and 2 feet in, and then as you go to put it towards your chest or whatever, then somebody knocks into you and the ball falls out, you've already done enough to me to warrant that being a catch.
And certainly I think if you're out of bounds and then there's somebody like a coach or whatever comes over and can actually interact with you like a fan would in baseball and have an impact, then I don't think we should have that as part of the rule book. So I think if whatever happens when you're in bounds should be the rule. Well,
and I'm also worried that if there was any rule that fan interference is irrelevant, where you make that abundantly clear, it's gonna lead to drunk idiots in the first row trying to knock the ball out of a guy's glove. Yeah. And
the coaches encourage the football coaches to go
right. And all that would do, especially in baseball, is encourage a guy who's not very athletic, who's got too many drinks in him, to try to throw a punch at a player, and he would miss the glove and hit the player. So to me, it's about trying to get calls as right as possible. Trying to have the rules be as simple to follow as possible. Because I'll look at it another way, and we'll talk about some of the block charge calls and other things in the NBA. But when I watch NBA games with my wife the last few years,
she watches with you.
Oh, she loves it.
Oh, good. Okay.
But when she would first watch, so she's sitting there watching a Warriors game with me, and she would ask, well, why is that a foul?
It's easy to enjoy basketball when you're a Warriors fan, but carry on. Sorry.
Well, now.
Yes.
For 20 years, not so much.
Currently.
But now, yes, absolutely.
I'm just a jealous Kings fan over here. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I mean, I was jealous of your Kings teams with
Weber,
who was a Warrior, and Stojakovic, who we could have drafted, and Divac, who we could have traded for, and
once upon a time,
and Adelman, who was our coach. Like some of your best Kings teams.
We had a little bit of fun for a couple.
All could have been Warriors. Anyway, so we'll digress on that. But when she would say, "Well, why is that a foul?"
Mm-hmm.
and my response has to be, "Well, that's James Harden, so," or "Why wasn't that a foul? That looked the same." Yeah. Well, that's Alfonso McKinney. He's nobody knows who he is. Mm-hmm. That is stupid. Mm-hmm. The idea that there would be like an all-star gets the call and a fringe player doesn't get the exact same call in the exact same way. Right. That's stupid. And when you're talking to an average fan or someone who's, my wife was genuinely interested in learning more about the game, and she would watch and be like, "Well, why is that? I don't get that." And then I can't explain it with normal dialogue that makes sense. Yeah. Then there's something wrong with your sport. Yeah. And to me, when you see guys making amazing catches, there are so many good wide receivers in the NFL. And we could talk about how the NFL hates wide receivers and how that's why none of them are in the NFL Hall of Fame, or it takes them years and years to get in the Hall of Fame. That all wide receivers are considered divas and all this kind of stuff, right? I do think there's legitimate hate for wide receivers in the NFL by a lot of people that are involved in the rules making. So I think part of the reason that catches are so hard to actually make one anymore is partly because they could care less about receivers. But if we go back from that, it's so hard to explain to an average fan what the heck a catch really is. Because there's just no rhyme or reason for some of these rules. And if a guy has both feet in and has the ball, what happens after that shouldn't matter. And if a guy has his hands under the ball, it shouldn't matter what else happens. And in that being said, if a guy knocks the ball out of his hands, then it's a fumble. If you define it as more clearly a catch more often, then if the ball falls out, then it's a fumble more often too. So then fumbles become easier to identify. So to me, it's about every rule you have in your sport should be easy to explain to someone who doesn't know the game inside and out. Whether it's golf or tennis or whatever. If you have a rule and the average fan has no reason to understand it, and then when you try to explain it to them, they're more confused than when you first started. You're making it harder for a new fan to come to your sport.
Yeah, and I think people in New Orleans have been struggling with that for the last couple of weeks with that pass interference call too. Like, how is that not pass interference? I don't know.
or how could that not be looked at as something that's easily reviewable? The league fined the player for the hit. But nothing happened about the play. And I do understand you don't want to do like, well, let's replay the game from that moment, a couple days later. Like, that's a ridiculous thing. But
get them all back on the field.
If the referees if the referees realize, wow, we really screwed that one up, we should have thrown a flag. And 2 minutes later, they're like, you know what? We actually should have thrown a flag there. And we can't run another play until we rectify this. Yeah, Rams fans would have been upset, but they would have gotten over it because when they watch the replay, they're like, yeah, that was pass interference. Whereas the Saints have nothing to do but just complain for the next calendar year. The only way it gets defended is if the Saints win the Super Bowl next year. And even if they do, they're still going to say we could have won back-to-back. So it's not even going to help if the best case scenario is that Drew Brees is the Super Bowl MVP next year. Even if that happens, all Saints fans are going to realize that they could have easily had 3 Super Bowl wins because Drew Brees' one is right now the only one he's got. And if they win next year, they're going to feel like they should have had 3.
And my solution, just to remind you, is 100 guys in the truck.
100 guys in the truck.
Hey, I have one more, by the way.
Last
one. Which is a quick one. I don't want to get political here on our first episode of the podcast, but...
Well, I'm wearing my Eric Reed jersey, so we can get political.
All right. Well, that was not quite the direction I was going, but my this is not necessarily a rule change, but I just feel like the Washington Redskins need to be banned from the NFL until they change their nickname, because the Redskins as a nickname is just like, it just blows my mind how that could even exist still, and so I mean maybe saying banned from the league is a little bit too strong, but I feel like the vast majority of people like Redskins fans or not, can probably see where I'm going with this, because it's just not fair to the Native Americans to have.
Absolutely, and it's a disgusting slur.
Oh my gosh.
So to me, it's
if there's even one Native American in the world that thinks that that's in some way offensive, then we need to just make just call them the Red Storm, like St. John's University did.
Right. Well, and
Easy fix.
And they have the Hail to the Redskins, and they use the hashtag HTTR. It's like, so you find another R name. The Red Storm's fine with me.
Or we can have fans vote on it. That would be cool, because then they have a say in it.
Yeah, but the Redskins is awful. The logo is disgusting, and it's not doing a service to any Native Americans to use that slur. If you want to change it to another Native American name that's going to honor them, fine. But
or we can have them weigh in.
But Dan Snyder and his smug billionaire self doesn't want to change it because he grew up with the Redskins name and he doesn't want to change it. There's no reason for that to be the reason. That makes no sense to me. And it's again, it's very simple. Like you said, it's a disgusting slur. It doesn't belong, and it should be changed. And banning them from playing is extreme, but I'd rather have that than to just continue for the next decade or so with the horrible name. Yeah. If the Washington Bullets can become the Washington Wizards, then the Washington Redskins can become the Red Storm or whatever.
Washington, D.C. does not have a good history of nicknames for their sports teams, it seems. The Nationals, the Senators, those were okay. But anyway, okay. Are we done?
So I think we're done. So, hey, thank you guys for listening and appreciate you guys being a part of this. This, again, is our first episode, and we plan on doing more episodes on how to fix your favorite sport. And we'll come back next time with everything from college football to the NBA, college basketball, Major League Baseball, tennis, and more.
And synchronized swimming. No, that's probably not what we're going
to. Yeah, maybe not synchronize it.
Just maybe regular swimming.
All right, so until next time. Have a good one.
Okay, see you later.